Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the BS and Beer Show. BS stands for Building Science, of course. Our topic tonight is making high performance cost effective. I have my notes on that screen. So I'm Mike Maines. Tonight I am drinking a Maine Root ginger beer, nice, spicy, locally made ginger beer. And let's see, our goal at the BS and Beer Show is to spread BS far and wide. Again, that's building science and to have some fun doing it. Technical difficulties aside, we are excited that participation is growing. Really want to thank everybody in the audience tonight, everybody who hung in there with our technical challenges. It's just nice to get people together to talk about building science. And we also really want to encourage everyone to start local groups. The local groups are growing. That's really what BS and Beer started as. Your local conditions, local education level, practices, materials, all that. It's really worth it to start one of these groups locally. Several of us here have done it. It's not hard. You just tell people you want to meet at a brewery or wherever and talk about building science, and people will show up. Feel free to use the name. We are working on a website that will have some tips, that will include some tips for starting your own group. We would like to sincerely thank Green Building Advisor and Fine Home Building Magazine for being our new media sponsors, helping us spread the BS. And I would like to introduce the other hosts. We have Emily Mottram from Mottram Architecture, Travis Brungardt from Catalyst Construction, and Brian Pontalillo from Green Building Advisor. And we also have Justin Fink from Fine Home Building Magazine sitting in as well. And I will turn it over to Emily.
Yes, thankfully, Justin has decided to be the tech guy tonight, so I'm off the hook. So if there's a tech issue tonight, it wasn't me, but typically I'm in charge of the tech stuff. So I was going to also have ginger beer tonight, Mike, but then my husband came home with we're having some Sam Adams West Coast Rebel IPA. Not sure I ever had this. He's the only one that leaves our house, so you get what you get. But he does know I like IPA, so he usually comes home with some kind of IPA. So tonight having the IPA. Afterwards, this will be posted up on our YouTube channel, the BS and Beer Show on YouTube. So Google the BS and Beer Show on YouTube. You'll get to see previous episodes. So if you didn't get a chance to see last week's, that is up already. The two previous ones prior to our BS and Beer Show communication with Green Building Advisor and Fine Home Building are available on the Pretty Good House YouTube channel. So check in there at the Pretty Good House. We're also working on our website where we'll have links to join the mailing list and all of that good stuff. So we will let you know when that is officially available and up. I get to briefly introduce our guests. Unfortunately, Alan's not here yet. We'll say yet. Hopefully he'll have a chance to join us. We have Christine Williamson, Randy Williams, Claire Betts, Ben Bogie, Dan Hines, and I am actually going to let them all introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves. So we'll start with you, Christine, since you were a last-minute ad. We'll let you go first. So tell us a little bit about who you are and
what you're drinking.
And what you're drinking, apparently.
All right. I'm drinking a Bordeaux out of a Burgundy glass. I'm very particular about the glassware, actually. Weird the preferences that emerge over your life. I never thought I'd care about something like that, but I do. Anyway, I'm a building scientist. I work on investigating building failures, and I teach people how to avoid those failures in new construction. And I've got an Instagram feed where I post a lot of this stuff on, and I think I'm here tonight because I posted a little bit of a sort of SOS on that a couple weeks ago. And so our wonderful friend Michael Maines sent me an email being like, if you're depressed, you should join us. So here I am. Hey, I mean, I'm fine. But a lack of connection is, especially professional connections, has been a little tough. So it's so nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so this is exactly why we started this. Okay, Randy, why don't you tell us who you are and how you got here and what you're drinking?
Okay, well, maybe first what I'm drinking. I am drinking a Minnesota beer. It's hard to see. Greenbelt. It's made right here in Minnesota. My dad actually drank that when I was a kid. I remember drinking that. I'm an energy auditor. I do some energy assessments as well. I do some design work. I'm a former general contractor, and I also do some side tiling work and interior finishing work still. Just because I live in a little area, I can't stay busy doing just the energy assessments. I'm also a licensed electrician. Been in the trade since 1996 and still learning. Happy to be here.
All right, awesome. Oh, it looks like we may have picked up Alan again, but Claire, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you're drinking, if you have something.
I'm Claire Vent. I'm a HERS writer and engineer, and I have a company that basically specializes in residential energy, working with contractors and builders and homeowners. I'm a wannabe carpenter, and but I use those skills to work on my own house, which is an old 1830s cape. So I've learned a lot along the way, and happy to be here and look forward to talking with everyone tonight and learning a lot, as I always do.
Okay. Alan, I'm not sure if you're muted or not, but we're having all of our guests introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about who they are. So if you want to introduce yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Sorry, we're having a snowstorm here and my power went out just as the webinar was about to start. So now I kind of scrambled onto my phone. So anyway, I'm Alan Gibson and I'm owner of Geologic LLC. I'm a carpenter by trade, been a builder for about 30 years, and I formed Geologic about 10 years ago with architect Matt O'Malia to design and build passive house all the time. And we've been pretty successful with that. We've built over 100 residential units of passive house, mostly single family, but some multifamily. We do some renovations, but mostly new construction. We have a line of pre-designed homes called the Go Home, the gohome.us, and we panelize most of our buildings and general contract homes from start to finish around the coast of Maine.
Great. Thank you. Ben, if you'd like to introduce yourself. I know you spoke last week. A lot of people got to hear great things from you, but tell us who you are and what you're drinking. All lies.
So I'm drinking a Hive 55 from right around the corner from Allagash Brewing. It's literally 2 miles from my house. I am a second generation high performance builder, self-admitted bearded weirdo, and obsessive thinker about all things building related.
All right, that's awesome. Did I cover all of our guest panel? Oh,
Dan.
Dan. I'm sorry. Sorry, moving things around. I did not mean to forget you. Dan, please tell us who you are and what you're drinking.
No worries. I'm drinking Dance of Days by Atlus Brewworks. It's a small brewery here in Washington, D.C. that opened up right next door to some sites that Habitat for Humanity was doing at the time. So we've known them since day one. And I actually got married at their brewery last year. So good beer. You guys should check it out when you come down here. I am now the production manager, but I've kind of worked on the sites for Habitat for the last 10 years. And I work in Habitat in Washington, D.C. right now, along with my good friend, Andrew Modley. We kind of run all the construction activities for the Washington, D.C. affiliate.
Great. So I think those are all of our guests, and I'm gonna, let's see here. Brian, it is apparently your turn, according to Mike's schedule. Introduce yourself and tell everybody else what the ground rules are.
That's for me to do? Surprise.
How many of you are
okay.
If you
I was
don't,
gonna say, would you like me to do that part? I can handle. Well, tell us who you are, and then I'll do the rest of those things.
Sure. I am Brian Pontalillo. from Green Building Advisor. I've been at Fine Home Building and all around that crew for a long time now. I've also done some building over the years, both projects for myself, and I've made a little bit of money building here and there. And I'm part of the crew here tonight. My job is going to be mostly to monitor the comments and the chat feed to see if there's any comments that I should pull out and interject, or good questions that either I'll interrupt with or save till the end. So if you have comments or questions, please post them in the chat box, and I'll be paying attention to the best that I can.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if you missed it earlier, Justin explained this is a webinar format. So for those of you who are new to logging on, you'll only get to see and hear from the panelists. Everybody else is turned off. If you have a burning something to say, put it in the chat box so that Brian can see it, or raise your hand on the bottom of your screen. If you are on your laptop or your computer, you should be able to click on the bubbles to see the chat box. There's usually a very entertaining chat conversation going on the whole time as well. But if questions come up during the discussion, just put your questions into the chat box. Everybody else is muted unless someone on our end unmutes you and allows you to talk. So we're going to use the chat box, and we'll evaluate next week whether or not that makes sense. So turning it over to you, Travis, our fearless guy from Kansas City. So tell us a little bit about who you are, and if you have Mike's list. If not, let me know. I'll
I have Mike's list. I'm ready. Yeah, hello. I'm Travis Brungardt. Myself, along with my friend Joe Cook, own and operate Catalyst Construction, which self-performs some of the finest residential building in the Kansas City area. Joe and I also partner with Joe Nichols at Thrive Building Solutions to operate the BS and Beer KC chapter, where we're currently in the heat of Wall Assembly Suite 16. So if anybody wants voting updates, I have the voting
vote
updates.
for my wall system. Vote for my wall system.
Yeah, you definitely could use a little help, Emily. Dan
I
is
know,
up
Dan's
7 over you right now. So
Dan's kicking my butt with his rock wool because nobody is talking about carbon offsetting yet. So log on and
there's some chatter on there. We've got a couple of clubhouse leaders in the panel tonight. We got Ben Bogey, who's up 18 over Fenco. Mine builds up 5 on BS and Beer Chattanooga. Jake Bruton's 8 ahead of Northwest Aero Barrier. Dan's 7 over Emily now. Mike's 19 over Matt Epple. Randy is 18 ahead of Trevor Acorn. Steve Basic is plus 12 on Monticello Custom, and Build, Learn, Teach trails by only 2 to the Nerdy Building Dudes. So you got a couple more days to vote at BS and Beer KC on Instagram. I'm drinking the Bavarian Weihenstephaner, as I typically do. I like the Bavarian style. And I would like to propose a toast, and we'll get this discussion going. Ordinarily, we toast the North German Prost, which is just cheers. But in light of COVID, I thought it might be appropriate to go with Zum Wohl, which is to good health. So cheers and Zum Wohl.
Indeed.
Cheers.
So to kick off the discussion, since we're discussing making high-performance homes affordable, I feel like we have to kind of start by defining what is high performance. Obviously, none of us would defend code as the high-performance home, but there's probably a middle ground somewhere between maybe the Passive House standard and code that we would probably consider high performance, or maybe it's closer to passive and further from code. Would you want to start us off, Ben, and define high performance?
That's a tough call. It really depends on what your client's expectations are. To me, high performance is kind of a fuzzy word, and I'm not super crazy about it, honestly. It's like calling something green in my mind. It's what draws the line of distinction. But to me, high performance in regards to what we're all practicing is anything that's trying to push above code as far as health goes, durability goes, energy efficiency goes.
But high performance sounds more sciencey than green. Right?
It looks
high performance. I mean,
it looks good on the business card.
Yeah, exactly.
Anybody else? Randy, would you describe it as anything different than what Ben said?
I guess the only thing I would add is it's meeting or especially exceeding your customers' expectations. You know, getting to that point is high performance to me.
Yeah, no, that seems reasonable. I mean, Alan, because you focus on passive house and very close to passive house, would you disagree with any of that? Do you think high performance has to be close to passive house, or is there a gray area between what you're doing and code minimum?
Yeah, I'm happy with gray areas. That's fine. I mean, none of the terms are particularly great. Passive house is not a great term either, but we're kind of stuck with it. So, you know, I think standards that have actual energy targets that you have to meet have a little more teeth in them. So that's where I would look to, you know, passive house as having that standard to strive toward.
Yeah, I think it's the term is the beginning of the discussion, not the end of the discussion. Right. So when you say high performance, what do we mean by that? There's room to talk about what that is. One thing that annoys me a lot is when there isn't, that discussion doesn't happen. Yeah, and particularly also when it doesn't when you're very selective about what you incorporate with the high performance moniker. I think there's semantics and then there's performance in our industry, but I think if you are trying to build a high performance home and you do not include energy, then that's not, I mean, it's possible. I guess you could be referring to the awesome lighting design you have or the really cool acoustic performance in your home. But when you say high performance, at least in our industry, there's at least a minimum understanding that you're talking at least a little bit about energy.
Yeah, I would add energy efficiency, whether that's somewhere between code and passive house. I think it Ben's right. It really does depend on the client expectations. I would also add comfortable, comfort in there. And also as we kind of get into these changing weather patterns and resilience.
No, that's a good point. But you guys, I mean, I think when people hear high performance, they automatically think it has to cost more. I think, any of us in the design or construction world know that elements of high performance cost more. Does high performance always go with increased costs, or are there different ways to think about it? How about back to you, Claire? Is high performance always more expensive? Is that a true statement?
I don't think it has to be. I think this is really about meeting client expectations and then coming up as a team as to what the best approach is to get to whatever those goals are for a client's perception of what high performance is. It's, so I think that we work to put those goals in place, and then the costs kind of line out from that. But it doesn't necessarily need to be more expensive. It's just basically a thoughtful, holistic approach that focuses on all the things that we kind of touched on. Building assemblies can change. Everyone has their choice, different assemblies that they like and that they have experience with, and that's what makes it cost effective. If you're aligning up your team so that you've got assemblies that are something that your builder as part of the team kind of can line up with, then it really takes a lot of that additional cost out of it. Having said that, I think there are things that as we build differently now that we need to educate people about, and that's what this is all about, really, is education. And trying to get everyone up to speed on the same page.
Yeah.
One of the Sorry, Mike. One of the things that I frequently get questioned from a lot of people that are just kind of starting to wrap their heads around high performance assemblies is, well, you're paying for all this extra insulation. And that, guys stumble over that and they think, I'm not going to spend all this extra money on more insulation. That's just adding cost to my client. But the critical piece of that equation that they're missing is by adding more insulation, then we get to downsize our mechanical systems. And we can often pay for, if you do the upfront energy modeling and look at your project in pre-construction, you can often balance those costs that you're ending up with a building that's a lot less money to maintain and carry over the life of the building.
I think that's a really valid point, and something that doesn't get talked about often enough is what is the cost to actually live in it afterwards too. So, if you, most of us who do more insulation have sort of figured out that, yeah, insulation has a cost value, but it has usually a fairly short payback period. And so especially if you have a client who's going to finance their build over a 30-year mortgage, a lot of things pay for themselves. Claire and I are both HERS raters. We use energy software to evaluate a lot of those things. And we can kind of say, like, yeah, maybe it doesn't make sense to go to a triple pane window. From an architect's perspective, and Travis and I have talked about this, is, with a good design, you can eliminate windows. Well, windows are always expensive and they're always really low performance. And, Alan, I know with you guys with Passive House, it's really important the orientation of the building and, in some cases, thermal mass. And so those are design considerations that if you have a good design, it doesn't always cost more. I mean, depending on some lot considerations, changing the house so that it faces south is usually a free thing to do.
That really, that sentiment, Emily, goes along with something that Steve Dimitrick just wrote, which is that that high performance can't be treated as an add-on to a code-built house. It needs to be integrated into the design from the beginning, including considering the costs. So that idea that it has to happen from the get-go. Has to be, that has to be part of the process, from the earliest stages. And that's something we've been, all the architects and builders that we've worked with at the magazine and the websites for years have told us about every successful project is that it just requires, not only integration from the get-go, but buy-in from everyone from the get-go.
And that's a critical point, because in this conversation, timing is truly everything, because the budget is usually the consideration at the start of the project. So while you can save tremendous operating costs over the life of the building, if you don't have enough money to afford that better envelope, then it doesn't get built. And then, of course, as Brian said, timing is everything with the design. If you have the builder and the architect sit at the table to sort this stuff out before you start that design process, and the client, of course, to talk through your discussion about, well, can we deal with one less window in this elevation or in this room? That's where those numbers move. The problem is that the timing that we're usually faced with is it's at the back end. We have a client coming to us as builders with a plan that's complete, and the architect has said, yeah, this should be about $250 a square foot. So get your builder on board. And you go, whoa, hold on. So what windows did they specify? Oh, they didn't. What's the insulation and air sealing package? Oh, also not specified. Okay, well, my standard is, the bottom of my package is this product and this assembly, and your architect did not figure for that. So now I'm out of the running. So now you have specified, because you said this is the cost, you've specified this lower performing structure, and the client's budget is still that. So the timing of that budget and that design colliding is what ruins the possibility of it. Basically, it makes high performance an upsell when it's timed that way, in my opinion.
Granted, we kind of live and operate in a niche market in the country in the Northeast as far as the high performance building goes. But just over my career, I'm seeing more and more clients coming to us starting this conversation and looking for this. And it's a positive thing to see that clients are out there and going on the internet and researching and stopping into things like gas and beer possibly, and educating themselves, and then coming to us or coming to the architect from the get-go and wanting these things. And I guess it's just a positive affirmation for me to see that change starting to happen in the marketplace, and hopefully we continue to see that.
I think that's part of the reason, we practice integrated design too, is like we really try to get the builder on board like way sooner. And, it goes back to, what everybody's saying is if I gave a plan set to every builder in the room, you'd all want to build it differently. So it's really important to do that. I don't know, Alan, is that part of the reason why you did a design build format?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're in a little bit of a privileged place because that all we do is passive house. So we don't have any of those conversations about return on investment and, should I spend money on extra insulation? It's just automatic. And I think it kind of, I want the whole industry to get to that level, obviously, so we don't have to have these conversations anymore, because I think it kind of does us a disservice to talk about, what's the marginal cost of going to passive and what your return on investment is going to be, because it's so much more than that. I've never sold a house to someone based on the return on investment of a passive house upgrade. People come to us because they love the design, they're sold on the concept, and it's all about quality, durability, indoor air quality, health. There's so many more things that we should be talking about than just, does this make economic sense? And, I could go on that subject for a while, but that's my general thought.
A lot of people, I think also, they don't, they're intimidated by things that they don't understand. And so, I mean, specifically with owners. So, if I could liken building a house or working with an architect or a builder to build a house, I think it's a little bit like the same intimidation factors at play when you go to build a car and you're meant to negotiate something, but you go into the negotiation not really having a whole lot of understanding about what it is you're negotiating. So negotiations are easier. Like, we never apply this logic that we've just talked about to like kitchen countertops or aesthetic features that owners really like. But there also exists this, it's asymmetrical information where the professional knows a lot about something and the person that, the homeowner, doesn't know that much. And so we have these sort of dual jobs. We need to kind of bring them up to speed so that they can make intelligent decisions, but we're also trying to sell them something. And that's where some of this give and take comes, I think, where people become really suspicious of this and they try to like, well, are you giving me a good deal on my wall assembly? And use that, sort of apply that mindset, I think, kind of unfairly to what we're actually trying to achieve. I don't really know what to do about it. It's tough. I think actually HERS ratings are one way. Same with Passive House. Any kind of system that we can come up with, even if it's imperfect, if it's a good system, it helps educate homeowners so that they're better positioned to work with people and have some sort of metric to compare things that seem the same to them, but they're really different to us, right? But it's a real challenge. That really annoys me, though, this sort of insistence on return on investment type thinking with things, when we do not apply that to like 90% of the other decisions we're making in our lives. And it ends up being like, seriously, you're fighting me over an inch of insulation. And you might compare, okay, so the cost of doing it, of this insulation versus this other insulation, is 30%. But that compared to the cost of the whole house might be like not even 1% or 0.5%. So like, why are we even having the conversation? Let's just do it right. Or do it, I shouldn't say do it right, do it better. Just come on, let's go. Trust me. But anyway, not everybody trusts me. So we're all in the same boat, I guess.
Dan, what's your experience with Habitat? Are you guys building, above code minimum and having to look at cost numbers, or can you sell things on quality and comfort and durability?
Yeah, so I'm pretty lucky in the fact that I don't have to try and sell clients on what we're building. Our clients need whatever we're building. But on the reverse side of it, we struggle pretty hard because every savings we can make in building a house can be put towards building another house, which is our overall goal, to try and build as many houses for people in need as possible. But so we struggle very hard, myself and the other people in our construction department, with where that sweet spot is that we're building as good as possible, as cost effectively as possible, which is one of the reasons I know when I first met Michael and talked to him about it, the Pretty Good House really struck home for me, because I've been lucky, and one of the reasons I came to work for DC Habitat was that I've been lucky enough to build the first passive house, be part of building the first passive house in Washington, D.C., and then go on to lead the construction of 6 more. So energy efficiency is definitely a passion of mine, but the other passion is affordable housing, and trying to find that sweet spot of the most bang for your buck, and while still giving them a comfortable and resilient and durable home, is I think what we should all be striving for. Now, obviously, if you're building $1 million house, the cost of the insulation package might be a smaller fraction, depending on the size, obviously, than our 1,200 square foot Habitat houses, where the numbers are just smaller.
Yeah.
But it's that much more important, honestly, and it's easier for me to sell. I tell our fundraising department that the easiest thing for me to sell donors on is, if you give us X amount of money more, I can change the bills for our homeowners for the entire time they live in this house. So if you give me X amount of dollars more, that investment will directly pay off to our homeowners over the course. That's an easy sell to donors. So it really, honestly, and people are very giving when they think about somebody else's money, but for whatever reason, they sometimes are Scrooges about whether or not they're going to get their return on investment. I agreed so much with what Christine was saying. We don't talk about return on investment on almost anything else that we buy. We don't talk about return on investment on the car we buy. We buy because it's the one we want that we can afford, or X, Y, or Z. But for some reason, high performance has gotten stuck in this rut of trying to sell it as a return on investment, when for most people, the home that they're buying new or building brand new, if they have the advantage to do that, is the biggest biggest outlay of money they're going to do their entire life. If you explain to them and they understand that maybe the amount of money you put into the finishes shouldn't be X% of your budget, taking a look at the components that are not as easily upgraded over time and are not and are more indicative of how the house is going to perform, I feel like people take that to heart. It's just they don't know. And like you were saying, educating is part of the problem with building houses and selling them, I think.
I think it's also just extraordinarily intimidating. So I think people make these comments about return on investment, and I think a lot of times they don't actually mean it. It's like an excuse for something else. It's really hard to contend with all these things we don't understand. I was building my own house or renovating my own house, and I'm in this business. And even I found the number of decisions I had to make really quickly was really overwhelming to me. And I know about construction. I think we kind of, it's sort of a tool that people use to help them. They're grasping at something to help them make a decision. And I think a lot of people would respond and do respond to different motivations.
I think that's a really good key too, is there's so many steps and there's so many parts to it that what are you comparing it to? Yeah. Like, yes, high performance costs more if you're comparing it to a code built house, but to borrow from, I heard Steve Basic say this once, code built is the worst house you legally are allowed to build and sell to people. That's not what we should be comparing the houses we want to build against. And so when you take a code built away and say, what are the cost increases to certain things, then you're getting to a real discussion of what's important, instead of saying, oh, well, this is the worst house I can legally build for you, and the cost increase off of that is X. That's starting from a false premise, because we shouldn't be striving to the lowest thing that we can do legally.
Hey, I have an idea. What do you think about this, everyone here? Like, that really the big investment in high performance is hiring us. Like, I mean, not all of us, obviously, but like hiring a professional isn't really the number one, the first thing that you do if you want to pursue something high performance is hire a professional who's trusted and good and reliable. Discuss.
Should
What do you
be.
think, Rin?
Like, we're the premium, you know, not the insulation.
Well, can't you just build high performance without needing to pay an expensive consultant or designer or architect or somebody? Can't you just build high performance? What's the problem?
We don't need to be seen as expensive, though, because
Yeah.
you know, a little bit of time up front goes a long way. You know, if you hire me to give you whatever 20 hours worth of consulting time for $1,000 up front in your project, I can easily save you that amount of money in the project and give you a better home to live in. So we don't need to be seen as expensive. And I think something that was touched on a little bit before that I think is going to help raise the industry and the market's perception of what we're doing is the fact that hopefully we'll be seeing HERS ratings worked into the code here soon. You know, I'm not sure if it's the 2022 cycle or what it is. I'm sure Claire could probably expound on this a little bit. But we're going to be seeing mandatory HERS scores in the code. And that's really going to, you know, it's like the miles per gallon on a car. Everybody sees that and they look at it. You know, the person that's going out to buy a Porsche isn't going to care about what the miles per gallon are. But the average shopper, they're going to look at that and say, oh, do I really want this crummy car? Or do I, you know, maybe want this little bit better one? So we're getting there. We're just not there yet.
I think a big related thing to that is how it gets worked into the value of the house, right? So for at least in a lot of places now, and certainly here, the cost of the house and how much you can sell it for has no bearing on how efficient or well constructed or anything it has to do. And somehow finding a way to get the the appraisers and the banks to pick something or pick a number of things that can somehow get worked into the evaluation of the house goes a long way to allowing us to spend a little bit more because it's in the equity of what you're building at that point.
Yeah, no, that's good, Dan. Let's just take a quick break here since we got a late start due to technical difficulties. I think we'll plan to keep going beyond 7 o'clock for anybody who's interested. But I will give a warning at 6:55 and 7, just if anybody does have to leave, totally understand. And yeah, and let's switch over to some questions from the group, from the audience.
Well, the first question that I highlighted came out of when we were talking about integrating the design process, and someone earlier on asked, how do you get a builder on board? Or let's just change that. Let's open that up a little bit. How do you get a builder? How do you get a homeowner? How do you get anyone on board who, at the beginning of a process, maybe it's a builder who's never built high performance before, but they're the builder that your client has chosen. So how do you get a builder, the builder's buy-in on doing new things they haven't done before, and building to a standard that maybe they don't see any merit in? Any takers?
That's a tough one, Brian.
Get a different builder.
It takes a lot of effort. I think as a HERS rater, I get involved sometimes in the middle between homeowners and builders. And I do think that integrating the design, and sometimes, you know, designers are involved too, but there are times where owners come to me as a HERS rater and want some guidance on building envelope type of thing, and they don't know exactly what to ask for, but they know they want something more than what they've been getting traditionally. And so part of I see Christine touched on it, is really about education and spending the time and involving people at different points along that process to give them the information they need. And that could be whether it's performance, whether it's cost, whether it's all of it rolled together. I really think integrating as a team is part of that. But I have worked with traditional builders in Maine, and I've gotten a lot of hairy eyeballs, for sure, with the, really, you want me to do what? Type of thing. And sometimes I feel good about that process and it works out fine, but other times it's a non-starter because it's not a good fit with what the client really wants.
Yeah. I'd like to, a bunch of people said right away, and then a bunch of comments say, they keep saying, get another builder, don't work with that builder, etc. But if we're trying to move the industry forward, I think part of that, for one thing, there's only so many high performance builders in the country. Most of them are either in this panel or paying attention to this chat right now. I mean, it's small. We know that from working at publications that cover the whole country. This is not the whole of our industry. This is a very small part of our industry. So I think if the goal here is to move the industry forward, part of that is going to be to lead in a way where you take someone who's skeptical and show them the way. I mean, any business not just building, but any business that we want to move forward, if we want to be leaders, that's part of our job. To take people by the hand and to be good leaders and bring them along.
Yeah, as an architect and a HERS writer, I struggle with this a lot. Claire actually has done a bunch of inspections with me on, some of my projects, and I'm always willing to work with the builder if they're willing to be open-minded from the beginning. And I usually try to, from the design aspect, is get some money into my contract as a pre-construction for the builder, because it's a lot of work for them to come up with cost beforehand. I mean, you can't have 50 to 80 hours into a project before you even know if the client is going to build it. So we usually try to build at least a little bit of money for the builder into it. And then education. Maybe it's because I teach or because I'm a HERS writer, is usually I try to get them on board and on my side, but also say, do you have anything to bring to the table? And that usually helps, like, how have you done something? Like, this is what we're trying to achieve. And that usually opens the door for me. And I say, there might be one or two things where I'm going to jump up and down and be like, you're going to do it my way, whether you want to or not. And I'm going to ask you to do some strange things. But for the most part, if you open it up so they feel like they're inputting things that they could do better, that usually helps. And I think the fact that the codes are getting better, like, everybody who, high performance and this word greenwashing, whatever, as the codes are getting better, they're having a harder time understanding how to achieve the current code. And that's a foot in the door for you to be like, hey, we could do this better and easier and in a different way, and get beyond code level by just saying, hey, this will meet code. And by the way, it's easier. And we've tried this a number of times. So that's my current strategy for helping. And there are a lot of people in the panel who said use a different builder. There are some people where I've just walked away and said, nope, not going to happen. If we stop letting the homeowners lead how we build, like, you wouldn't ask your doctor how to perform some kind of surgery. So, as building and construction, we should stop letting the homeowners dictate that the granite countertop is more important than the insulation. So
the other part of this is any good conscientious builder that I've had a conversation about, any builder that will actually think about a conversation and the state of what they're doing, generally understands high performance. And that's the crucial first step. Is, the stuff we're doing, everybody likes to think that it's this, sexy, high-end, difficult, European, fancy stuff. It doesn't have to be. It really is just about understanding some basic concepts and applying them. So, I've had like my comment before about, the pushback on all this new insulation, and then you tell them you can downsize the heating system. You have those conversations with a reasonable builder, and they're going to get it. And maybe you're not going to get the perfect building out of them the first time or the perfect project, but you started them down that path. So it really is. It's just about having these conversations with people and putting the information out there.
I think that, it can be, high performance can be done in an affordable way. I mean, Dan, you're doing it in DC with Habitat, and I work with Habitat up here in Greater Portland in Maine. And, they basically do, sorry, Mike, a pretty good house that is, that they decide to go that extra step of getting them certified, either with a HERS rating or Energy Star certified. And while it may not fit all the aspects of it because they have to deal with budgets and use materials that they get donated, they're able to build a house that meets the more recent energy codes, 2015, 2018, and they're getting air leakage in the 1.5, ACH 50 range. And that's pretty good with volunteer labor. And they've been able to do that over time. We've worked together to talk about different things, but they have also integrated, I think, as part of their discussions with their families and with the houses that they're selling, is that we're doing this extra effort, and they target actually an annual operating costs for all of it. And that is something that they can kind of talk about and really push as to why they're doing the things that they're doing. And I think it's a decent model, and they've been able to capitalize on really getting better and better as time has gone on. I've worked with them for probably the last 5 years or so.
Yeah. I've worked with a lot of builders over the years and who had never done passive house before. And they're good builders and they're smart builders. And if there's a good plan, like the big stumbling block is the air barrier, right? The continuous air barrier. And if you have a good plan where you've looked at every section and you've drawn your pencil line all the way around and it's clear and the builder can follow directions, they'll do it. And they only need to go through it once. The next time they totally get it. If they see the blower door number, they see that they've met some standard. And if they talk to the homeowner afterwards who is raving about how comfortable and warm their house is, that's what it takes. And I've worked with builders like that who have no problem latching onto it, as long, their first experience needs to be good and they need to be successful. And then you've just converted another passive house builder.
So because we're coming up on 7 o'clock, in case anybody, including panelists, need to go, I wanted to thank, again, thank all the audience and thank all of our panelists, including Christine, who got volunteered at the last second. How about if we just go through quickly and everybody just take, say, a maximum of a minute to list their 1 or 2 or maybe 3 favorite tips for bringing the cost down on high performance, and then we'll get back to audience questions. We haven't heard from Randy in a while, so Randy, you're up. What's your best tip?
Air tightness. It's the easiest thing to achieve. In the planning stage, hit it in the planning stage. Get a strategy down and teach the builder. For me, working with the builder to achieve whatever tightness goal we want to achieve. The one I've got going now, I'm calling it the code minimum house. We're shooting for 1.5 ACH 50, which isn't a big change. I'm testing, most houses I test are 2, 2.25, 2.5 currently, so it's not a big step to get to that point.
Can I jump in?
Oh.
I think this might actually help put some of this in context. But since there's a kind of like a census, but for houses and for commercial buildings. And the one for commercial buildings is called CBEX. The other is for, it's like RBEX, something like that, for residential buildings. And they track energy use per year, but it's, you know, it's in the aggregate. And residential energy use since the 90s has consistently gone down. By every way that you want to look at it, it has gone way down. It's gone down per house. It's gone down per square foot. It's gone down per household, and it's gone down per household member. Since the 90s, we're per household member, we use about 25%, maybe a little bit more, 25 or 28% less energy than we used to. And it's just been a steady decrease. And I think, my hypothesis, I don't know for sure, this is very hard to actually figure this out, but my hypothesis is that this has become, the reason that we've been so successful is that we've improved air tightness. And like we used to not build with sheathing at all. And so we've gone from incredibly leaky homes to the numbers that we just heard, and to passive house. And I think that you're absolutely right that air tightness has been our lowest hanging fruit and continues to be our lowest hanging fruit in this area. I'm kind of excited to see where the numbers end up going, actually.
I'll jump in here. I think the biggest way to make it low cost is just put time in on the front end. Hire somebody that's an energy rater, somebody that can run a good manual J for a couple of different building assemblies for you. And I think that's one of the easiest, quickest ways that you can make a big improvement on the overall performance of the home.
I'll jump in here from the architect's perspective, and I talk about this a lot. I'm going to capitalize right on what Ben said is, investment from the beginning. There's nothing better than a good design and an integrated design process with your builder. But I also think, and I've heard Alan talk about this, is we need to get people on board with building plans that are already designed. Like, not everybody needs something custom. We do a community project. We build 6 at a time. It's the same house every single time. People without building skills build these things. Matt, I don't know if Matt's on tonight. His students, built those. So we need to, simplifying some of those details is really slick and streamlined is, that. And I'll say panelization. We figured out how to manufacture pretty much everything else in our life. And I think that if panelization caught on a little bit more, if you take a look back at the Sears and Roebuck's house where they sent you a kit of parts and you put it together, like that was a cost-effective way for people to build houses back then. So I think that is part of the direction we need to go is panelization.
I'll agree with that. I'm excited about panelization and doing it a lot more and seeing the benefits. I'd also say from the design perspective, the number one factor in cost for a building is form factor, the ratio of surface area to floor area. And that's the first place to start. And that's why bigger buildings that house a lot more people in a bigger box are much more efficient to build and on energy performance. And of course, the single family residential home in a field is the number one worst way to house people from a cost and a performance factor, but that's kind of what we got in America. That's how we do things. So make simple structures, simple boxes, and then it's just details. We know how to put together a window package that's less expensive by using more fixed glass, keeping windows 18 inches from the floor so you don't have to use tempered glass, all that stuff. Know what insulation material is the lowest cost per R value and also has the lowest carbon footprint, and just go through every single part and just be smart about it and make decisions that lead to the best performing house for the dollar.
I'll speak up for the builders in the group here that you don't have to wait for the designer, the architect, the client to ask you to execute these details at a high level. You can make a huge difference, an enormous difference in the durability and the cost of operating that home with some really simple stuff. It's Joe and I always talk about taping and trying, caulking and caring, It's stupid, simple stuff. Exactly
I
what
love
Randy's
that.
talking about. Yeah, thank you. It's really, it starts with air sealing, but your durability is in your water. So if you're managing these things, regardless of what it shows on the print, if you're managing the air control layer and the water control layer, you have done a huge service for your client. You're making your architect look good if they didn't detail it and you know the right thing to do. But the whole thing is in the details. You've got to have people that care about effectively completing the task 100%, because it's that one little strip that doesn't get done. It's the piece of tape that was put on at 4:30 when people wanted to roll up. It's that failure that costs for the life of the home, that costs for the next 3 homeowners that live in that house. So it really comes down to the hand on the work, taking the full responsibility for the life of that structure. So it doesn't have to be super expensive stuff. That the hands make the difference. Sorry, architects. You guys make a great deal too.
One of the commenters is just funny. Caulking and caring, not spraying and praying.
On a shirt.
That's great.
So I'm going to jump in because every time you wait, somebody steals a really good answer. But to just kind of tag off of that, my big key when we did our passive houses was because I was terrified the first one I led about not hitting the air tightness level, is somebody has to own it. You know, when you hire a plumber, they own the whole plumbing system. If it doesn't work and it fails, you know who you're calling. If you hire a roofer, they own doing that roof correctly. But, and I'm sure this is different in some places, but at least around us, nobody really owns the air barrier. So when we started, and I do it on each project now, somebody is on my team is in charge of that. It's typically whoever's going to be leading that house, but it may not be. Like on the second set of passive houses we did, I had a really great year-long volunteer who is now a construction supervisor in Denver, and she was amazing. So I didn't want to do it anymore, and I put it on her, and she did better than I did. So challenging younger people and seeing it as an opportunity to give somebody ownership in how the build goes and give them something that they can excel at. It also gives somebody that is now constantly thinking about not missing those details, like Travis was talking about, not missing that piece of tape. Oh, the plumber punched a hole through that he wasn't supposed to. I need to make sure that gets sealed up, which can get lost if one person that's trying to manage budget, schedule, subcontractors and all that, having that person also be the one person that's worrying about that could be a little bit too much. So picking somebody that's directly in charge of air tightness is my tip.
It's a good one.
That's an excellent point. I couldn't, I'm thinking that, if you combine everything that everyone has said, really it comes down to air tightness, and then everything else follows. And I think if what I have found is that more traditional builders that are trying to learn it, they kind of look at you like, well, that's not my job, that's the insulator's job. And I think that in working with them and kind of putting in the time with them and educating them, and as Alan said, it only takes one test for them to figure out it's just not that hard to do, and this doesn't have to be complicated, to get down to more manageable levels to achieve comfort, and then the water control layers and everything else follows from there.
What else do we have Brian, for questions?
Well, we really don't have many in the way of questions. One, Tim McCarthy did ask earlier, and I thought this was interesting. I've actually asked architects and builders this question quite a bit myself, but he asked, why do we include, I don't remember his exact wording, but why do we include homeowners in all the micro decisions? Like so I've asked that a lot, like how, when I hear from an architect or a builder who's saying that they were struggling with a homeowner to get them to say upgrade their insulation package or their envelope package, when the homeowner wants these other things, I always ask that question, why are you actually talking to them about the specificity of their envelope? Like, can't you just do that? Can't you just spec that and build that without including them in those decisions? So I think that's an interesting question for some of you to address.
Yeah, do that.
Sorry, go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, don't do that. Just you have your package, you have your way of doing it, and it has these advantages, and that's what we do.
Yeah, I'm not gonna value engineer my WRB or my flashing systems or any of my approaches, especially to like water management. And then also, like Christine was saying before, we're the professionals, so why should we be allowing them to decide what's the right amount of insulation? Granted, that one gets a little bit blurry because if you're really trying to push your levels in insulation, that is heavily dependent on the client's expectations. But for the most part, we take the choice on the envelope and the envelope detailing right out of the client's hands. We're not compromising on that because that's our biggest area of liability too. So if we're not value engineering that, then we're also not exposing ourselves to risk.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Like Alan, we sort of stopped saying that we do code-built houses, so people stopped asking us to build code-built houses. And once we sort of took that out of the equation and just said, hey, this is what we do. Like, if you come to us, it's going to be, better than XYZ. They stopped asking. And when I went to Bensonwood and I talked with Ted Benson, he often says, like, this is my envelope. You can change whatever you want on the inside here, but like, you can't change anything on the outside. And I think that's, the insulation isn't the pretty stuff. It's not the stuff that they care about. So don't make them care about that stuff. Talk about all the other stuff that's important. Do you have health issues? Do we need a HEPA filter on your ERV because you've got major seasonal allergies? Or, do you want to sit next to that window when it's negative 15 degrees in Maine and just be like, hey, it's really nice in here? And so talking about the way they want to feel in their spaces, maybe because we're all really interested in the science, we sort of forget to not talk the technical things with owners.
I work with a lot of clients who are not who are owners but are more institutional owners, or they're approaching this from an investment perspective. And I advise a lot of architects who are trying to muddle through this, and builders who are trying to muddle through this stuff themselves. And I think that the best advice that I can give in this respect is to be an owner, or be a builder or an architect who's thought about these things in advance and come up with your own internal standard of care. And this is what we used to do with specs. Like, that's what your specs should be. They're sort of the idealized version of the specs is like, this is the standard of care that we're expecting on this kind of job, or on all jobs that we do as a firm. This is our water management approach to windows. This is our approach to thermal control in our buildings. This is our approach to air control, whatever. And when you have your own idea of your own standard of care, it's a lot easier to either talk about those things or not talk about those things with clients. So you end up making only the alterations that we just discussed here, that they're like, okay, well, do we, you're talking about U values for windows within a certain percentage, not within this like giant, the difference between where you're at and where your client is at is much smaller, and the conversations are much different. But you have to have that. You have to not be winging it yourself. Like, you have to decide where your own threshold is for risk and performance before you can, because you can't let the owner drive the bus on that, because they don't know. They're not capable of doing that. Do that yourself first. So what is your own company standard of care? The code is the standard of care for I suppose, for better or worse, for the industry. But what's your standard of care? And come up with that. It's amazing to me how many architects I work with who don't have that. Their standard of care is sort of they have one, they just haven't thought about it. It's just whatever they've done before. So like, it's whatever window detail they've already used, whatever, like, that's just what they do. As opposed to, no, this is, we've thought about our risk, we've thought about performance, we've thought about our goals. this is what our standard of care is. Anyway,
to tag off of that, I think that's one of the reasons that so much of this pushing the envelope in quote unquote high performance has been pushed by design build firms, is because they're making the decisions about design along with their client, but they're also building it. And it seems like a lot of the successes in projects that aren't design builds, they got everyone together before they had fully designed the whole thing, which is one of the reasons it's a little bit easy for me at Habitat. Is we're the developer and we're the builder, which means when we have a new set of plans, I get to, as the person in charge of the builders, I get to also be in charge of the architect and talk to them and say, no, that detail is not going to work for us because we need to do X, Y, and Z in this order because of how we build. And so there's able to be a conversation at that design part about how we are able to do things and come to the best solution, which is, I think, a conversation that also happens in design build firms. And if that just became a conversation that always happened, meaning whether you hire a builder and then you get an architect, or you hire an architect and then you get a builder, you always have those together before you start really making final decisions on a design, then the builder has buy-in, and even if they've never done a high performance before, they're going to feel more reassured about doing it because they're part of the decision process and they can do things they're comfortable with, rather than just giving them a set of plans and saying, price this, and then picking the lowest bid.
I've always had beaten into me by my father coming up in the industry, and I know this is a military saying, but it's the 7 Ps. And forgive me for being a little bit crass, but it's proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. And it really, that ounce up front will save you a pound at the end.
Yeah.
It's all about. Well, should we call this a wrap? Or does anybody in the audience or panel have any last?
I don't think we have any lingering questions right now. People are still commenting a bunch, but I don't think we have any questions that we didn't get to.
One thing, if I might just make a last comment, to say that, high performance costs more. It costs more because it's better. And we don't have to apologize for that. It's totally fine. You get a better thing. You get better value. So I wish we could move away from talking about or apologizing for why high performance isn't the same price as code. I mean, you want to do it as cost effectively as possible, but you have to sell the value. And that is what will make people buy it. So
don't talk about how efficient it's going to be. Talk about how comfortable it's going to be, how healthy it's going to be, how durable it's going to be.
Right. I've never sold a house based on return on investment. It's always about the stuff you just said, Ben. And that's what I think we should be focusing on in this industry, and get away from that marginal cost increase concept.
I get a lot of mileage out of risk.
Yes.
Out of risk, because people, that's another, I mean, they're right to fear this, but it's a huge fear of a lot of homeowners. This is for a lot of people, right? It's their single most expensive asset, and it's their primary vehicle for savings in their whole lives. And if you can address proper building that way as a tool for risk mitigation, where, okay, you're hiring somebody who's competent and who's not just competent themselves, but is managing a competent team, so that you're not going to have a roof failure after 2 years. You're not going to have your sheathing be rotting and lose all of the equity in your house to repair it. Anyway.
I also think that I liked, Christine, what you said about standard of care and how we all need to have that. I think that if we can focus on that in our discussions and keep the discussion more about comfort and durability and good indoor air quality, we keep them out of the details. Yeah. Because they grab onto details, and then it kind of just, the whole conversation goes down the rabbit hole where it doesn't really have to. I think that is part of being, your stealth package, what you use as your standard of care, and then talking more about those other things, that there is an awareness coming. It comes up more and more now, and I think we just keep that conversation going.
Well, cheers to that.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you sincerely again to all of our guests and all of the audience, and Brian and Justin for helping out and being our media sponsors, media partners. And yeah, hopefully next week we'll have things a little bit smoother on the invitation end of things. And but this has been a great discussion, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. This was so fun.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Night, everybody.